guys, my name is Carla Ganem and I am an art teacher at Strongsville Middle School in Strongsville, Ohio. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this beautiful watercolor painting inspired by Claude Monet and his water lilies. The first thing you're going to need is a picture to draw some inspiration from. So I looked online and I found a picture that I really liked of his water lilies. I really liked a couple different aspects about this. I loved the background. I loved all of the cool colors in the background and the placements of the different greens. And I also loved the flowers that he has here. I loved how realistic they looked, and I loved the deep magentas and the light pinks in there. So I thought I could get some nice inspiration from the colors that I saw in this. So any image you want to look, Google Claude Monet water lilies and you'll get a ton of different pictures that you can use to inspire your artwork. The first thing you're going to need is the paper to paint on. So I chose to paint on a light blue paper. That way any of the background where I didn't paint the waves was still gonna be blue. And then you can see that I framed it on a dark blue paper. So you'll need a piece of light blue paper and dark blue paper. And these actually started out the same size. And once the watercolor was dry, I actually just trimmed about 1/2 inch off of each side. And that helps with two things. That helps with the curling of the paper, because naturally when the water dampens the paper, it'll curl as it dries. The second reason that I trim it is because sometimes you miss the edges when you're painting the waves, so this kind of gave it a more realistic look where the waves were just going right off of the page. The second thing you're going to need is a messy mat or a messy manila to do your painting on, because like I just said, a lot of the paint will go off of the page, like the waves that you're doing, so this will keep your surface area nice and clean. The first type of paint we're using is watercolors. So I'm using these Crayola watercolors. I love them. There's 16 different colors. You can use any different watercolors. We're basically using the cool colors in that palette. You'll need a paintbrush and a cup of water. And it's always a good idea to keep paper towels on hand, especially for the next part, because we will be using a different paint for the water lilies. So you can kind of see that these water lilies are a lot less transparent. They're more opaque, so you can't see through them. That's because we use this tempera paint. So I have Crayola tempera or Blick tempera or any craft paint that you might have at home in the colors that you want. That should work. So I love this magenta, and I lightened it up with a little bit of white, and then I did some yellow accents on there. And then for the lily pads, which you can see underneath these flowers, I added a tiny bit of turquoise, which you'll see in a minute, and I will darken up some of those areas on the lily pads just to give it a little bit of a shadow for a dark green. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoy and have a great time. To start this painting, we're going to be using watercolor paints, and usually I will use mostly cool colors like green, blue, indigo, and violet for this. Since this is a brand new set, you can hardly tell what some of the darker colors are, so I'm going to add a little bit of water to each of them to kind of test them and see if it's a dark blue or a dark violet, so I know what to start with. I'm going to start with a light blue first, and I'm just going to create some basic waves on the background of my light blue paper. I'm going to add a little bit darker blue and create the same types of waves, just overlapping, filling up the space, and even going off the page. That's why it's important to have a messy manila in this. I'll move on to some indigo in certain areas and also some green, and I'm kind of trying to locate those in specific areas, not all over. When I flipped the paper, I noticed that my waves were kind of getting lazy towards the end, so doing this kind of makes a little bit more of a balanced background. I really like to make sure I fill in all the negative space and also go off of the edges. For the next part, we'll be using tempera paint, which is much thicker than watercolors. We'll be painting the water lilies pink first, starting with a U shape, a line down the middle, and then 2 lines in between, just like 5 fingers on your hand. This is just the base layer, so if it's a little bit transparent or see-through, it's not a big deal because we're going to add a little bit of color on top of this.
I choose 5 because I like odd numbers in my design. I feel like it creates a more balanced composition, especially when some are large and some are small. Adding the white helps to make a little bit of a lighter magenta on the lily. And notice I haven't washed my brush out in between. I'm simply just wiping the old paint off on a dry paper towel. After I think the white is nice and blended into the pink, I'm going to add a few highlights with the yellow. Notice that I'm adding a little bit of white to my yellow because the yellow is very transparent and I don't want it to be too see-through. I want it to be a little bit lighter to give that highlight on the bottom of my water lilies. Again, I'm just using a dry paper towel to wipe my brush off, so we're not adding any water to this. I don't want it to get too mucky. After we finish this portion, I'm going to be adding the lily pads, and instead of just using green paint, I'm actually going to use a little bit of a turquoise blue tempera paint, and I'll just add a tiny dot onto my foil next to the yellow. I like to do this because I like to mix my own colors. That way I can get a variety of shades. I can get a light green, a medium green, and a darker hue of green. So again, I just wipe my brush clean. I'm going to use that same brush and add a tiny bit of blue to the yellow. Mix it together. I'll test it out on the paper and see if I like the color. If not, it's just paint and I can always paint over it. I'll make a narrow oval underneath all of my lilies, and adding a little bit of white to that green I think makes it pop a little bit more, makes it a little bit less transparent, so it's covering the waves a little bit better so you can really see those lilies. Adding the darker values to that makes it look a little bit more realistic and similar to what we see here on Monet's water lilies.
All right, thanks for stopping by, guys. I hope you saw all those kindergarten examples and got some ideas of your own. Their placement was awesome. Some were grouped together, some were farther apart. And the good thing is this is such a quick and simple project. Once you have all of the materials out, you can make 5 or 6 or a couple hundred of them like Claude Monet did.